As a developer, at the moment, when I make changes to my game, it's a lot like closing my eyes and kind of just like throwing darts at a dartboard. And then the brilliant part is that I don't get to see the dartboard. I just kind of hear the reaction of the crowd to my dartboard throwing skills. And if the crowd sounds impressed, I'm like, oh, brilliant, that was a great shot. That is basically how launching features in games at the moment works, unless you're using outside analytics platforms.
Welcome back to Beyond the Blox. We've been taking it in turns to be off, and this week it's Anthony's turn, so you've just got two of us again. We're your hosts. I'm Adam.
And I'm very sick Fedor. This week we're going to be generating magical 4D objects, translating our speech to text, expanding server CPU power, A/B testing new features for games, and enabling custom matchmaking for all games on the platform.
Let's start with 4D generation, as Roblox likes to call it. Fedor, what can you tell us about the new feature?
Yeah, right. So at RDC, as we've talked about quite a bit, David Baszucki showed off his, I believe, watermelon shooting banana gun that was dynamically generated and basically was described in real time by the user and then behaved based off existing developer input. How this magical 4D generation system should work in theory is, like I said, you as the user input something, the developer defines how that's controlled, and then the Roblox Cube 3D generation technology generates the actual geometry and textures for your thing, and then it is placed into the world where you as the user can interact with it, have a bunch of fun. In reality, the developer obviously has a lot of control about how this behavior occurs. So, for example, if I'm the developer of a racing game, which I actually am, it's been quite a bit of fun. Instead of giving the user the ability to pick out, open a couple of crates to get like a Lamborghini or a Porsche, or well, sorry, we don't have any official brands because we're not licensed, but these various cars, you could give the user the opportunity to describe their own cars of their dreams, like in the example they showed off, I think like some sort of cat car, which was quite fun. And then I, as the developer, would take all my existing code that says, okay, the car has four wheels, it has a body, it has a steering wheel, it has lights at the front and at the back. And then I would give that to the Roblox generation algorithm that would take my constraints on it. Like, okay, the car obviously can't take up the size of the map. It has to not have a million triangles because my game is meant to run on low-end devices. And then combine that with the user's input to give them, the rainbow cat car they've always wanted. As a developer, obviously, there's some concern on my end about how I would implement this because, for example, a big part of monetizing that racing game I mentioned is selling users on the super cool looking Lamborghini car. So then, if you, as the user, can just go generate your Lamborghini Rainbow Cat car, you're never really going to want to engage with any of those systems. But overall, it's pretty exciting, and I'm really curious to see what developers will come up with. And I'm really excited to jump into some worlds where more of Roblox games are defined by the user, which is, I think, something that was really emphasized back in the early days with like build modes and stuff like that, and it's kind of died down just because of the technical complexity. So overall, not completely magical 4D generation. Definitely a lot of developer handholding still going on, but a very interesting and surprisingly visually cohesive feature they're adding. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It definitely a bit of a lift the curtain kind of thing of what was shown at RDC was a little bit magic because we didn't see any of that behind the scenes setup. We just saw the user ask for something and suddenly they got this fully functional
Yeah.
object. But I do still think it is quite magical, quite impressive. I'm interested to see kind of how constrained can the developer get with this. We saw with the text generation API that there was sort of there's the ability to add a system prompt where the developer pre prompts it with something and the user prompt, and the system prompt has precedent over it. I'm kind of interested to see how good is the control that developers have here with the geometry generation. You might want people to be able to design their own car, as in the example you gave, but you don't want it to be, you want it to be realistic. You want it to be a realistic car. You don't want it to be an animal car or some sort of, transformer car or whatever. So yeah, interested to see how that works. But as you say, I think the name 4D is a little bit a little bit misleading, or a little bit intended to be magical and kind of beyond what we've seen before.
Yeah. Just to touch on that system prompt, my understanding is that, yeah, as the developer, that is exactly how you do it. In addition to defining the code and how these pieces come together, you can also just be like, make it hyper realistic or make it hyper cartoony just to match the developer vision.
Nice. That's quite good. There was a bit you touched on with monetization there, and I was thinking about this quite a bit after the RDC talk, because one of the examples, I think maybe the one that you were touching on, was Jailbreak's one of Jailbreak's creators, Alex Balfans, was there, and showed, I guess, a prototype of what it might look like if you had this in your game rather than just a traditional store of pre-made vehicles. And I think a lot of people were worried when they watched that, and they had to go onto X and sort of be like, "Don't worry, this isn't being added to Jailbreak. It was just a demo kind of thing."
Yeah.
But yeah, for developers, for the monetization, it's interesting. I suppose one of the ideas is, do you put this as a feature behind a paywall, right? Like a game pass of custom vehicles, custom whatever it might be. You have to buy that once, but then you can generate lots, or maybe you have so many that you can generate for tokens or whatever, these kind of things. I can't remember if there was a restriction actually on how you can monetize this. I don't think you're allowed to pay per generation, is what I think, but I might have to read that up and check. But yeah, it definitely changes the game in terms of how you monetize this. It changes it quite a lot for the players as well, right? Because one of the things with traditional monetization of in-game items is usually you pay more for the slightly rarer and more exclusive items. Maybe it's gold colored, maybe it has sparkles that come out of it, whatever it might be, that makes it feel more expensive and more worthwhile. And does all that kind of go out the window if you could just ask for that object, right from the get-go? So yeah, developers will need to think quite a bit how they roll this out. I'm interested to see how some of the big games on the platform that have really dialed in monetization, if any of those want to try it, how they go about doing so.
Yeah, I think also just as a reminder, this is like this feature right now is in early access. So I believe it's
Yeah.
limited sign up to a few developers. I'm pretty sure it's not actually available in playable games. So it's basically, I believe they want to roll it out to playable games in the near future. It's also limited to, you can only generate, so basically how this works is that there's schemas that define the behavior. So you can have a car schema with 5 components or a body schema with just 1 component. And that is at the moment all you can generate. You actually cannot make a battle mech in this early beta. You can literally only make a 5-part car or a body. So this is not something that players will probably see for quite a bit in any of their favorite games at the moment. So I think as developers, we have a lot of time to figure out what monetization looks like in a post eye candy world, I suppose, because like you said, that has been the underlying mechanic for monetization is like you don't have to, when you monetize stuff, you don't necessarily have to implement an entire new feature. You just make something that looks really cool and players really want. I think there's a lot of interesting room for if maybe you don't have to spend as much time doing the cool shiny bit, you have a little bit more time to define custom behavior, and maybe players are paying for new features, which is ultimately what I think everybody cares the most about. But for sure, a lot of very interesting conversations are going to happen at a lot of these really big studios and at the heads of some of the big popular games on the platform.
Oh, that's really interesting. Is there anything here around IP and like protecting IP? Because I wonder if, you mentioned there your car game doesn't have Porsches and Lamborghinis because you don't have a license for it, but could someone come along and say, give me a Porsche 911, and will it do so?
Yeah.
Or
So
is that kind of thing blocked?
yeah, right now, obviously all prompts pass through, because they're just text prompts, they pass through the Roblox safety filters as a bare minimum, obviously. And then they also are passed through their IP platform, which like filters for exactly what you're describing. Like brand IP platform stuff that the game is not licensed for. And in theory, this connects to the rights manager. So then perhaps there is a world where maybe my racing game, has a license with Porsche, and they also give me my custom Porsche 911 in real, a wonderful, wonderful world that we live in. But basically, if my game does have a license, perhaps the rights manager could read into that and say, okay, wait, this user can generate a Porsche or a Lamborghini or a Koenigsegg or whatever. But at the moment, they're very concerned with, it seems, people bypassing all the IP filters with AI generation, which has, if you have seen anything about AI generation, just in the broader tech space, has been kind of a dominating sort of issue, and the general approach from companies so far has been to just kind of like get rid of all the safety features about AI, and you have crazy SpongeBob Simpson generation going on, and then eventually they get the book thrown at them and they're like, sorry, no, we didn't mean to do that, and then they kind of lock it all back down. So it seems like Roblox has learned perhaps from some of the past IP infringement crackdowns that have happened, and are being very, very safe and cautious about this, which I think is probably the long-term more sustainable move.
Well, on a slightly similar note, given that the RDC demo showed both of these things at the same time, speech to text came out into beta as well this last week. So one of the use cases was shown in context of the 4D generation, where you weren't just entering a prompt, but someone said the prompt of what they'd like to generate, and then it went into that 4D generation. So that was quite an interesting use case that they were already showing off. But speech to text, I guess, as its name suggests, is turning speech to text. This is a beta, so developers can start playing around with this, but this should be playable in games. It just means they might change some of the APIs, some of the exact configuration as it goes through that beta period. And essentially, it uses your microphone as it would do with voice chat, but goes through this API to turn it into speech. So there's a couple of use cases that Rails pointed out. One, as I said, is sort of asking for some sort of generation in the game, some sort of command to generate an object. Or the other use case sort of related that they came up with was casting spells. So you could have maybe even predefined text that the person has to read out, like spells from Harry Potter or something. And if it matches, then that spell will be cast. Another one was accessibility enhancements, so subtitles or transcriptions for spoken content. I'm a little bit skeptical as to how well that will work, because it's not continuous text to speech to text. I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment, but it won't be subtitling absolutely everything you're saying throughout the entire game. But maybe for some key interactions, that could be good. And then the other one was dynamic NPC conversations. So we also saw this at RDC, and this is you speaking through your microphone. It gets turned into text. It goes into some sort of text generation prompt, and then an NPC can reply back to you with something related to what you said. So that's quite an interesting use case as well. I suppose as I've been describing those, were there any other use cases that popped into your mind, Fedora, that you might want to use in your games?
I mean, it's obviously a very interesting feature, and that, like you said, they kind of outlined any sort of text, or sorry, voice-based interaction, which is, like we mentioned before, a very broad term. I think maybe one interesting example of a game that could use this is, for example, I've got a younger brother who's absolutely obsessed with Emergency Response Liberty County, and they've got a very interesting segmentation of their player base, where I think a lot of people use voice chat in the game, and then there's also a pretty significant majority who don't have access for whatever reason, and then that kind of causes this rift between like RP immersion, in the sense that you'll have entire servers where everybody is doing like realistic art, like police RP, if you're not familiar with the game. they're doing realistic RP through voice chat. And then, for example, for a while, my younger brother wasn't old enough to have voice chat, so he always felt very, very left out, and he just could not participate with these experiences because of, like the safety implications and all that. So I could see this being as like an interesting bridging feature between like they have like a radio comms thing that is currently text chat at the moment. Perhaps transcribing some key parts of that from the voice interactions to text could be really interesting. But it does seem like you mentioned that it's not currently continuous, so perhaps
Exactly, yeah. 'Cause I think that maybe overlaps a bit with the accessibility one, right? Of
yeah, yeah.
subtitles or something. It definitely would be useful for people who can't hear, either because they don't have voice chat enabled, or just because they don't want any sound coming out of their computer at that point in time. But yes, the limits we've got here are 10 seconds of audio per request, and you get one request per minute plus 5 times the number of concurrent users. But that's experience wide. So if you had, I guess, if you had 10 users across your experience, regardless of how many servers that was, you would have 51 requests in a minute for those 10 users. So that's not quite enough, I don't think, because you'd need
On every 60
uh,
seconds of user input, you get 50 seconds of that.
exactly, yeah, that's
Hmm.
it. So it couldn't be perfectly continuous. It's not far off, to be fair.
Yeah, actually. And then if you
But
factor in
yeah.
users, is that user limit based off users with voice chat enabled or just all users? Because then,
That's just all concurrent users. So yeah, I suppose you could be borrowing someone else's time, I suppose,
yeah,
who doesn't have voice enabled. So that's a good point. So you could piece it together. I think the way that it works right now, because you've got to factor some latency into this as well. They reckon there should be about half a second of latency, maybe more if it's more towards the 10 seconds rather than a couple of seconds of input. But importantly, that latency happens once the input is complete. I haven't yet played around with this to sort of uh, work out how you specify the input's complete, but I think you tell it, I want to start listening for audio now. You've got up to 10 seconds and then stop. And so I think you would just have to be a bit creative with it if you wanted to do something more continuous of kind of every time it stops, you trigger again to listen again. But it seems like it's more set up for you either press something or trigger something that starts it listening to you, and then you give your spell or your command or your whatever it might be, and then once you've finished, it processes that, goes through all the filters, and then you can use it for other things. So um, you can imagine that latency starts adding up if you then pass it into 4D generation, pass it into text generation, pass that text generation into text to speech, the latency can add up. So that's one of the things that they've said they're working on improving, is reducing that latency as much as possible. But yeah, it's a really interesting feature. It should work in all experiences, but because it uses your microphone, you'll have to be 13 plus to be able to do that. So same restriction as users who can voice chat, but there's no restriction on the experience as a whole needing to be limited to those ages. So that's quite interesting. And one more thing for devs to note is if you don't want voice chat on in your experience, but you do want people to be able to use this, that is possible. You'll have to enable microphone access. It will look like voice chat's enabled on your experience, but you can disconnect that at runtime, disconnect sort of a user's audio input from their emitter. Or you can disable a property in Studio before publishing if you just want it to be off the entire time. So that's quite cool as well. It does mean, say you had voice chat enabled in your experience and you wanted people to be able to give commands and those not be heard by everyone else, you could, press a button to give a command that switches off your voice chat for everyone else. You give your command and then it turns back on. Something like that is entirely doable. So it seems like they've thought about quite a few different things in this beta, at least, and it can only get better.
definitely excited to see how developers integrate that. I think on the topic of players' actions kind of generating stuff in experience, as I've sat here in this chair, I've kind of considered how bland and boring this black shirt I have here looks. And I was thinking about how great it would be if I could have a design on it, something that looks very nice. And no, we don't have official merch yet. This is just a graphic tee that I have, but it does segue into our next topic, in-experience creation. Essentially, like I said, if you're a Roblox player who's getting a little bit bored of your current avatar's look, it's a little bit generic, it's a little bit basic. You're wearing the same black tee, the same jean jacket that everybody is wearing. You will now have the ability to go into an experience, take, a specific black tee or a specific jean jacket and customize it to your heart's content, and then buy it and wear it in all of the games that you want to play. How this works is basically a developer will take advantage of the editable images and editable meshes system that Roblox is working on and is rolling out over time, or I think it's partially rolled out, to build out kind of whatever painting, drawing, mesh fabrication system they want to build out in game. Like think Microsoft Paint or maybe even something more sophisticated. And then they will add in existing meshes or like avatar items like layered clothing or accessories. And then you, as the user, will have the opportunity to take a specific item and then do kind of whatever creative process you want to do on it using the developer created tools, and then walk out with your own, unique customized thing. I think one of the things that I was a little bit disappointed about with this feature is that that item is completely unique to you in the sense that you won't have the ability to trade or sell it. What I was thinking is that maybe the potential is that you, as an artist, can create your own version of an item in game and then sell it to other people. And then without leaving one Roblox game, you could build out your own UGC business, which would, like I started making Roblox t-shirts way back in the day. They looked absolutely terrible because I was making them in MS Paint. If I had the ability to make my own t-shirts in game and then sell them to other people in game, I would have been absolutely over the moon. But even then, this is still, that's something that could potentially happen in the future. It's just not out yet because I'd imagine navigating the complications of like, okay, so if you're reselling another artist's work that you kind of modify, what is the split there? At the moment, how it
That's it,
works.
right? Because you're editing existing
Exactly.
meshes, editing existing images. So I can see the challenge with it.
Yeah.
I can definitely see the challenge with it. But that is an interesting limitation because otherwise it sounds like basically you can create UGC completely inexperienced,
I know.
which you don't have to download Blender, you don't have to learn how to texture, you can
The
just
UV
use
unwrap. Oh,
these exactly. But I guess that convenience comes from someone else having created the base mesh that you're working
exactly.
from
Yeah.
and having made that UV map in the first
And
place. So
to be clear,
yeah.
those people are still, that revenue is still being split. 40% of the revenue goes to the experienced developer. So basically whoever builds kind of the MS Paint thing that you're using to modify this tool, or sorry, this accessory. And then the other 30%, just like existing UGC sales, goes to the item creator. So it's still obviously lots of UGC creators have spent some time talking about the UGC rates at the moment and how equitable they are, but at least for now, it is staying entirely consistent with how much UGC creators have been making in the past. So yeah,
And can UGC creators decide whether or not their items are eligible for this? Because I can imagine there might be some creators out there who don't want you retexturing their items, don't want you editing the mesh of their items. They want them exactly as they've designed in the store. You buy their version of it and that's it. And I can imagine there's other UGC creators, and we might even see a new genre of UGC, which are kind of these base meshes, these base textures that are designed specifically for people to go and edit them. And they would want to enable that and let any of these experiences bring those items in for this purpose. Is that a control that they have?
I would imagine that logically it would make the most sense for you as the creator of the UGC item to have the ability to toggle that. I can't see that being a particularly difficult thing to toggle on and off, especially if, you do want to perhaps like make something that is for a cause or is limited in some capacity. You don't want people ultimately, I think there's been a lot of UGC artists that are be truly propelling like this to real fashion and real art. So you definitely want to have the ability to say like, hey, no, I don't want a 9-year-old defacing my beautiful work of art about XYZ and just drawing like rainbow stuff on it. So
Yeah,
for
I'd hope so. I
sure.
think Roblox have been rolling out permissions recently around meshes and around other asset types anyway, in terms of like stopping them from going into experiences that you don't want them to. Because previously, if you could find the mesh ID, you could pretty much load it anywhere, those kind of things. So it would be a logical step for them to do that, but we've not seen that confirmed explicitly yet.
And then also another interesting thing that I did notice in this is also a client beta at the moment, so it's still quite a ways away from being fully released and like fully functioning. So they're figuring out a lot of these things. I think one interesting thing is that my understanding is that you're able to draw obviously in real time. You can see your changes happen without like any kind of filtering happening. And then you can buy the item, but then it will go through the Roblox like moderation to make sure that you aren't, you know, as you can imagine, you're not drawing, particularly essentially not creating anything that would otherwise not be allowed on the platform. And an interesting component of the system right now is that you actually, as the user paying to create this custom item, don't get a refund if your item doesn't pass moderation, which is
Interesting. Okay.
very interesting. But I suppose it would really just depend on how accurate their moderation is in this case, because I think, in my experience, I've certainly had a lot of experiences where I've had perfectly innocuous items just get moderated for random reasons. And,
Yeah,
as
I
long as
was
that
going to
doesn't
say, I
cost me
think
anything, that's fine. But
Well, I think sound and video for developers have cost in the past because of the extra moderation steps. Someone's got to sit and listen through that sound or watch that video, and those have cost us Robux to upload. And I think if those fail, you don't get that back. So that there is already some precedent of you've paid because it has to go through extra moderation steps, and whether it's accepted or not, someone's had to sit and listen to it. So your money's gone. That's it, and
I
it
guess,
incentivizes you, I suppose, to do it right first time. But as you said, there's been plenty of times where things have been incorrectly moderated, which for developers is one thing because we can
yeah.
take a link to that item, appeal it, send it through. But if you're buying it in game, do you have an ID that you can send to someone? How
Yeah.
would you appeal
So
that? You know?
actually, they don't give any specific clarification on how that process looks, but they do say they may appeal the decision if they believe their avatar was incorrectly moderated and should be approved. So,
Okay.
once again, early beta client feature, they're still working this kind of stuff out. So I'm assuming that there will be some kind of procedure. Maybe it's like a Roblox message that tells you, hey, you created this thing, it got moderated, here's what you can do to appeal it. But yeah, I'd imagine it would be very frustrating to me. Once again, going back to 9-year-old Fedor, if I'd spent an hour painstakingly drawing my own beautiful T-shirt, and then I buy it, and then it gets rejected, and my last 30 Robux go to something that I can't even wear. That'd be a colossal bummer. So for sure,
Absolutely. I wonder if they get a lot of appeals. I wonder if the moderation load might go up quite a bit with this because it's so
yes,
open.
probably.
I think to upload other things to the platform, you've got to really try. Whereas this, if you have a game with 1 million players who are all generating their own things, a bunch of those are going to get moderated, and a bunch of those are going to want to appeal that. So I do wonder if that's going to be quite an extra load for Roblox, but
Yeah,
we'll
I
just
think.
have to see.
Yeah. On a final note, kind of looking to the future of this system as it actually becomes something that you can use in games and is out of the beta, I'm going to be really curious to see where this kind of feature converges. I think in a lot of like avatar customization stuff, namely avatar creation and like building out outfits, a couple of specific games have absolutely dominated that. And to his credit, Munib has built out an incredible, avatar outfit creator system, but there hasn't been very much competition to that. So I'm very curious to see if once this is out, there's just going to be one definitive custom accessory creation toolkit game that everybody uses and is massively popular, or if this will be a little bit more split out. Because I can't imagine with like mesh modification and painting, there is some room for different games to implement it in slightly different ways. but I'm not sure how much room there's going to be for that. So very
It's
curious to see.
interesting. I think I can come up with some use cases for this, but as you say, whether it's going to be quite heavily centralized in one place. Like we can all sell avatar items in our experiences right now, but there are those, extremely popular avatar editors
Yeah,
that you can go and find on Roblox. But for example, custom merch for your game. Like I can imagine, I've got a bowling game. You could have a bowling ball accessory that someone's holding in their hand. It would be cool if people could just design their own bowling ball pattern on that and then buy it. So, those kind of things that are specific to a game, that it's not the core purpose, but
mm.
you can go and make your custom items rather than me having to upload 100 different bowling ball avatar accessories in the hope that one of them suits you. It might be quite cool to have
Yeah,
that level of customization.
I guess
So we might see it in a few different places.
that's a really solid point. Actually, I was kind of struggling to think of an example where that makes sense, but that's yeah, bowling customized bowling ball is actually, and that you can use in game and on your avatar makes a lot of sense.
Great. Well, on to trivia this week. So I wasn't here last week, but the question has been sent to me, which was, which Roblox game has the most visits and how many visits does it have? So I think this is just all-time visits across all Roblox games. Which one is the most? I did watch back the previous episode, and I think you guys mentioned things like the classic Jailbreak Adopt Me, those era of games that have been around for a very long time, because obviously the longer they're around, the more they can rack up visits. So even explosive growth of things like Grow a Garden can't necessarily overtake 10 years of solid growth on the platform. So I guess, have you had any more thoughts about what you think it might be? Whether you think it's one of those trendy games that has, absolutely exploded in the past year or so versus a long-standing creation.
No, yeah, I kind of when I gave it some further thought, I figured that just like the scale of the player counts is so, at least in the past like year or so, has been so massively just completely on it, like orders of magnitude different from like I remember Jailbreak hitting 100,000 and that being, like absolutely Armageddon. Oh my God, this is the biggest game on the platform ever. This is generational. It's never gonna happen again. And then seeing like Grow Garden surpass millions on top of millions. My guess would have probably been something like Adopt Me, which kind of I think has this balance of being towards the end of like I know they've hit million, 2 million, couple of million, but they've also been around. I mean, at this point, I remember when Adopt Me was new, so I guess that dates me. But at this point, they're kind of a
Absolutely.
staple of classic, I guess, Roblox as a game that's been around for a while. So either Adopt Me or perhaps one of these newer massive games like Silo Brenrod, just with insane player counts.
Yeah. So I can confirm it's the former. It is along the lines of Adopt Me. It's not Adopt
Hmm.
Me. It is actually Brookhaven RP, which Aidan Parker guessed correctly in the comments this week as well. However, he guessed 1 billion visits. Believe it or not, they've had 74 billion visits as of today, which is insane amount of visits, like just absolutely insane. And that's the just power of being one of the biggest games for such a long time on the platform. It's just been racking up visits. But that is wild when you think that Voldex bought that recently, right? Like buying one of the most visited games on the platform. I can't imagine what the deal looked like there, to be a fly on the wall at the meeting of discussing buying such a large game. Maybe we'll have to get the CEO of Voldex on at some point as a guest. But yeah, Brookhaven has been one of those classic record breakers where if you remember it first coming out, you're probably quite an original Roblox player. But even now, it's still up there on the charts. It's one of the big ones. So, our next trivia question for this week, and please do comment if you have any ideas of what the answer might be. Roblox used to have a second currency alongside Robux. So, the question is just what was it called and when was it removed from the platform? Now, as we've talked, with all these old classic games, this question will definitely age us, right? So,
Yeah,
I think we know what it's called. It'll be interesting to see what people think in the comments. But when was it removed? Is a very interesting extra to the question.
I I
I
have a
I can't remember.
vague year range. I think it was, yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure I got it locked in. But I really do hope that the answer it'll be really embarrassing if all the comments are like no clue, no clue, no clue. That'll make me feel rather quite old at my ripe age of 18 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, I have a rough idea. I think it coincided roughly with where Robux started to have real world value, where you could take
Exactly.
Robux and turn it into real money, because that sort of made the second currency a little bit obsolete, or even a way of generating currency for free, which Roblox don't want you to do.
Infinite money
But yeah, I
glitch.
don't know the exact date. We'll have to see what people guess. Perfect. So back to the weekly roundup of news this week. One of the interesting, maybe developer focused features, but players might see an impact from this, is more server CPU. So CPU being the sort of processing power of the servers that Roblox runs on. And Roblox are introducing essentially dynamic server CPU allocation. So before, it used to just be whatever your max player count was, that would kind of dictate how much processing power your server had, and that was it. So if you had a 100 player game, you might have more CPU allocated to those servers versus a 6 player game, because the theory is the server doesn't need as much. So starting from November the 10th, rollout should be finished by the time this podcast is live on November the 12th. We'll have this dynamic server CPU. We did get dynamic memory allocation, I think last year, and so this is a similar rollout where the processing power scales based on the real time number of players in an experience. Now, nicely, this also just upgrades CPU for everyone because there is a higher baseline. So no matter how many players you have, you should get higher CPU anyway as part of this update. But then that allocation will increase or decrease as players join and leave your game. So it'll be dynamic. Creators don't need to make any changes. It will just automatically roll out. And like I say, as you're watching this, it should already be fully rolled out. It might affect some developers if they have systems that really depend on CPU and don't necessarily depend on player count as much. So if you just assumed I've just whacked up my server, player count to 700 and I can use as much CPU as I like, that will no longer be the case with this update. But otherwise, it seems quite positive to me.
Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, I think there's I absolutely love just giving credit to the Roblox engineering and infrastructure teams. They're absolute wizards. And my favorite genre of Roblox updates is this thing is magically turned on and everybody's experience is better for it. And I'm just like, oh, brilliant. You know, I have to do zero work and my game gets better and better for my users, better for my development team. So I mean, absolutely incredible. I can't think of any of the games that I own that are particularly CPU intensive. They've been generally pretty simple, at least on server compute. I know you have a different story. But awesome.
Yeah, we've got quite a CPU intensive one. Stepford County Railway, which I've worked on for a little while, is quite a large game in terms of player count per server. So we have a limit of 75, which I think is generally on the higher end compared to what you see for a lot of other experiences on Roblox. And it's a massive map. It's just huge in terms of scenery. I think we have hundreds of thousands of individual physical instances in the world that need to be streamed in or out. And we do use streaming, otherwise it would be way too much for those 2 GB Android phones and that sort of thing. But the server is the one that decides whether to stream things in or out, because the server's the only one out of the server and all the clients that knows all of those instances. And so it's looking at where everyone is on the map and deciding, you need these instances loaded in, you need them removed, that sort of thing. And that takes CPU. That takes quite a bit of CPU on top of whatever the game's already doing in terms of physics and in terms of collisions and all the other stuff. So we have found CPU usage is quite high on SCR, particularly when we've tweaked the streaming radiuses and stuff. If you make the streaming radius bigger, CPU usage is a lot worse. So I'm interested to see how the higher baseline affects this, because it would be great to just have more CPU in general, but also to see how well that scaling works to sort of make sure that utilization is at a good level and that we're not running out of CPU or hitting any bottlenecks. As a cloud engineer in my day job, I'm just massively interested to see how they've managed to do this, because this is really cool, sort of just scaling the CPU for these servers. But yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes. I'm gonna keep an eye on the analytics as this rolls out over the next few days, and see if it makes it better for our players.
Speaking of keeping an eye on the analytics and seeing if stuff becomes better for players, our next topic is one that I genuinely, when it was announced on stage at RDC, I really wanted to jump up and start cheering, and that is configs and experiments. Now, that may, if you're a player, may sound very unexciting, perhaps, but let me fill you in. Basically, what this means is that as a developer, at the moment, when I make changes to my game, it's a lot like closing my eyes and kind of just like throwing darts at a dartboard. And then the brilliant part is that I don't get to see the dartboard. I just kind of hear the reaction of the crowd to my dartboard throwing skills. And if the crowd sounds impressed, I'm like, oh, brilliant, that was a great shot. That is basically how launching features in games at the moment works, unless you're using outside analytics platforms, in the sense that I have a horse game where players breed horses and they get rare horses, and they, unlock the super shiny Nebula horse, and they're really excited about that and race it. And it's quite a bit of fun. But one of the big things that I was really struggling with was figuring out a solid algorithm for how the outcome of horse breeding works. Like, do I just always give them the next super rare, awesome thing? Or do I kind of give them some RNG in there? So, like, sometimes you get something really, really cool, and other times you just get the old, basic full or whatever. And for a while, I talked to players and I gave a group of testers different algorithms to play with. But with something like that, you can't really be like, hey, is this random curve equation that I've spent the past hour typing up at my computer, does that feel better for you? And are you more likely to engage with my game? It's very hard to get a concrete answer for that. And experimenting, also more commonly known as A/B testing, is basically the ultimate solution to this problem. In the past, I've had to use off-platform analytics services that, to be fair, have done a pretty good job of implementing Roblox API, but they're still ultimately not as good as the real thing. And basically, what these experimenting things let me do is create tests where some groups of users get one algorithm, some group of users get like the other algorithm, and other groups of users just get the basic same old algorithm unchanged. And then what I do is I let those users play the game without knowing what group they're in and what they're getting. And then we just see, okay, who spends the most time in the game, who comes back the most, who plays with their friends, who, spends the most money on buying the horse breeding boosts or whatever. And this basically gives developers kind of an analytical approach to making decisions about their game. So, instead of throwing blind dartboards, you can have, you can feel like Albert Einstein. You've got a hypothesis, and then you go implement it, and then you see the results. And you know what? It's a bad throw, it's a bad feature. The people in that group may hate it, but that's only like 10% of your player base. So your game doesn't collapse overnight. Whereas if you have a good feature, you see, oh, brilliant. This is, increased playtime and not hurt any of the other analytics. People really like this feature, and then you can roll it out to everybody else in your game and assume that you're likely going to get a similar reaction. Just a side note on configs. Configs basically are more of a utility thing, I think, in the sense that you've been able to also similarly do custom implementations through like a GitHub repository that it reads from, and it's a whole nightmare. And I know people have spent like hours or months trying to write a better one, and they're like, no, wait, this still sucks. I have to manually change this. This just lets you change stuff about your game without shutting servers down. So like let's say you do roll out a feature and then you need to hit the panic button and be like, no, 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 this feature is really bad. You can just be like, nope, disable that without having to do the massively disturbing process of shutting stuff down. So, kind of as you can tell by
Exactly.
my animation, I am thoroughly excited about using this in my games. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm very excited about this as well. When we saw it at RDC, as you say, I think everyone in the room who'd ever tried A/B testing, feature flags, anything like that, were very excited for this pair of features. And I think it's an interesting sort of interaction between the two, because you've got to set it up as a config in the first place so that it can feed into your game and change things, and then the experiment sort of changes that config value, if you were, and then I guess at the end you can set it. The use cases from Roblox were things like boss health, and like whether or not a tutorial switched on. I think generally this kind of feature can be used for all different live ops,
No,
and I
absolutely.
really want to use it for, showing and hiding things from the store at specific times. I can set up my Christmas event well in advance, set it all so that it all appears on the 1st of December, and I don't have to time publishing my game to be perfectly on time to, release some new features. That kind of thing's really, really cool. The experiments in particular, I think, are exciting. You could imagine, as you say, changing probabilities of random events is one, but you could change the cost of things in an in-game store with
Absolutely.
currency. You could change boss health or damage or attack or whatever it might be if you have a kind of combat game. One thing I want to try out as well is in sort of a lobby or a spawn area, does it change, how people interact, whether they're facing this particular thing or whether they spawn over here facing that instead? You could even have an A/B test of that, right? Of spawn A
Absolutely.
versus
Yeah.
spawn B, and the measurements. I'm not sure that you mentioned that all of the different measurements that you could get from this, but sort of the retention, the conversion to paying users, all of those kind of things would be really nice to see. And doing that manually was just such a chore before that most devs just didn't bother,
Yeah.
unless they were one of these top experiences that were really trying to like optimize
No,
every
exactly.
Robux.
Yeah, basically, right, for a while, I have thoroughly hated having to do live ops on my games because as I'm creating a game, I'm in this kind of fun, like, sandbox state where I'm like, this mechanic feels fun, or this kind of intuitively seems like the right thing to do. And I can obviously get feedback from my friends and other players. But then once a game is shipped and once a game is liked by people, ultimately Roblox is like an algorithmically driven platform. So you can have 5 people come up to you and tell you, this feature is brilliant, we love it, we will come back every single day and never stop playing your game if you had it. And then you go and release it to your 15,000 concurrent players, and all of your analytics fall off. And that is just a terrifying, terrifying reality that I have personally lived through. And it is horrible because it's like you've got this magic secret sauce, and then like you try to make a change and you make a couple of changes at once maybe, and then suddenly everything has gone bad and you're like, no, no, what has happened? And it's kind of this like, okay, do I just
It's the
revert?
classic science
Exactly.
experiment, right? You
Yeah.
change too many variables at
Mhm.
once, you're not sure which one caused the
Exactly.
drop
Yeah.
off.
And it just makes
So
developing games really like after an existing formula that like people like, making that any better becomes really difficult because you're so afraid of accidentally adding in something to everybody at once, and then your game is just loses all momentum, all engagement, and it's, you move on to the next one basically. With this,
I think
you're
your
going to be able
dartboard
to,
analogy was so good for that, by the way. Of
exactly.
just like throw a dartboard. Oh, the crowd didn't like it. Quick, I'll just take
Exactly.
that back.
Yeah.
Close my
Yeah.
eyes, throw another one. Like, keep doing that until maybe something sticks. It's not been a very nice experience to do that.
Yeah, now as a developer, I'm gonna feel a lot more secure in like, okay, this concept has like gameplay fundamentals, and as the person created the game, I believe that this is gonna be a lot of fun. But then also ultimately I can see the dartboard, I can see where I'm aiming it, and I can see like, if the components of the dartboard sort of to get abstract on you is like the ARP DAO up here, the retention down here, how much people are playing your game down here, you can kind of see where each feature lands on there, and then you can aim for bullseye on every single iteration. Wow, I've thoroughly worked through this analogy here. Brilliant. Uh,
It's great. I'm not sure whether all of the audience will necessarily you know
Probably not.
resonate with that. If you've not played darts, this might just be a completely random
Oh,
analogy that you have no
yeah,
idea what we're talking about. But
that's
hopefully you get how excited we are about this feature.
exactly.
Um, what kind of controls do developers have in terms of I don't know who this gets rolled out to? You mentioned people get put into groups and get served a particular a particular algorithm, a particular value for a config. What are our options there in terms of deciding the size of that group and how long these experiments are running for?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I believe my understanding is that like they give you parameters on the kind of your player base has to be this big for there to be statistical differences. Each group size needs to have at like because obviously, right, if you're conducting a statistical analysis of 3 players in your game, that's not really gonna be,
Yeah,
like it's perfectly likely that you have 3 people who absolutely love it and then everybody else hates it. So there are obviously restrictions on that. In the past, we've seen a lot of like specific demographic filtering on other features like advertising and stuff. I don't believe this currently has any of those advanced targetings in terms of defining who is placed into your groups. My understanding is that you basically choose, new players, old players, that kind of thing.
I think you're right about the demographics that we don't get to filter on those. I vaguely remember talking at RDC, and they did say that they potentially want to add that because I guess just splitting all of your players equally might not be the most helpful thing. It would be quite interesting to try out a change focused at the younger audience and see what that does. And you don't necessarily want to run that on everyone else, but I don't think we have that right
Oh,
now.
no, brilliant, actually. Sorry, I'm looking at the documentation right now. So basically what their suggestion right now is the actual test will get administered evenly and like you don't really get that much control over that. But then in your code implementation of this A/B test, you have the ability to override that. So like if the A/B test that they should get the new algorithm, but then on in your game's code, you can be like, wait, this is an old player. We want to keep their experience the same. You can manually override that. I'm not sure how that ties into the back end of the analytics end. Like, are they going to be classified as having that test, even if in reality, actually, you explicitly say, like, no, don't give them that test. Once again, this is a very new feature, and I'd imagine they're going to continue working on it. And I mean, if it continues growing at the rate that all of the analytics tools we've gotten so far keep growing, I'm sure it's going to get significantly better very soon. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Makes sense. I think there was one more bit of info that I think I got from RDC as well, which was those goal metrics of like D1 retention, revenue, paying users, the conversion rate. At the moment, they're pretty much just like the discovery signals. So the retention, the conversion, those sorts of things. I think one thing that they do want to add is more custom targets as well. So using the economy and analytics funnels that you can set up and being able to target a change in those, which would be big for games that have, say you have a lot of in-game currency, maybe you have a lot of earned currency in the game or earned XP or levels, and you want to see how that changes with some of these experiments. You can't do that today, but that is something that I was told is very much on the roadmap. So today, this sounds like an awesome feature. Like it sounds really, really useful. But it also sounds like with a couple of extra updates that Roblox already have in mind, this is just going to get more and more powerful over time as it progresses from beta to something more general release. So related to these experiments and this config is actually the last topic that I wanted to talk about today as well, that came out very recently, which is custom matchmaking. So matchmaking is just the system by which Roblox decides whether 2 players should end up in the same server. Sort of you click the play button on the website and it decides which server of the open ones to send you to. There is some science behind that. It isn't just random. It doesn't just send you to the next one available. But so far, that science and the matchmaking has been fairly locked away. Developers haven't really been able to play around with that or really understand beyond just specifying how many slots in a server should be reserved for friends, for example. That's pretty much the only thing that we've had in our toolkit. This custom matchmaking release basically lets us control how matchmaking works, and it's been rolled out to all experiences as of this update. So it was previously in beta with a few experiences. Now everyone can make use of this. And what you basically get to do is configure the existing signals that Roblox already use with different weights. So you're kind of deciding how much weight does a specific signal have. So we've got occupancy, how full is the server, age, which is just the age group of the existing people in that server, language, so what language they're speaking, latency of the people in the server, friends, so how much weight do you want to give to ending up in a friend server if one of your friends is playing the game, device type, so are they on mobile, are they on console, are they on computer, voice chat, so how many of the users in that particular server are already using voice chat, and play history, which I'm not really sure what that one means actually. I need to dig into that a bit more. I'm not sure if that's people who have played similar games to you in the past, something along those lines. So if you've got players who really enjoy, I don't know, role-playing games, you might end up in a server with them if you also play a lot of role-playing games. So you get these weights, and I think you can change them, I think from 1 to 10. I'll need to double check that as well, but basically it's a numerical weight for each of these. And so if I put 10 on device type and 0 on everything else, I'm only matching by device type, as an example. So this is really powerful. I think it's really cool to let developers change these weights and decide what's right for their game. If you have a very competitive game that relies on extremely low latency, first-person shooters, for example, you might not want to have a full mix of people with high latency and low latency in the same server. You might want to really prioritize grouping by latency. So those who do have a slower internet connection, I'm afraid you're going to be grouped with other people with a slow internet connection, and those with a really nice fast one at least can be together so that you get fairly even balance. So that's the type of thing that we're looking for here. Maybe if it's a really multiplayer game with a lot of collaboration, you want to group by language more than some of the other features, or maybe by age. These different filters are going to be right for different games. So I'm quite excited for this. Yeah, Fedor, what do you think? Like, have you wished to be able to control these in the past?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, right, like as we all know, Roblox, shocker, is a multiplayer game, and the quality of the people you're playing with is a very defining factor of your experience. You know, these aren't single player games, so like you said, if you're in a competitive setting, you want to have like low latency, similar skill. If you're in a collaborative setting, you want to be able to communicate with players and say, you know, if automatic translation isn't seamless and perfect quite yet, it's definitely beneficial to be with people who speak your same language, because how are you going to collaborate otherwise? So overall, I think it was always a bit silly to me that the only control I had was like defining how many friend slots there were. Uh so
Yeah.
now that, you know, ultimately developers know each type of game, their own game, the best. So like I know that, for example, in my game Cars versus Trucks, it's a pretty competitive but somewhat casual game. So I want like a good mix of people being able to communicate with each other and also being able to actually fairly enjoy the game instead of teleporting around and then communicating happening through them yelling at each other because they're angry that like, no, my car did not hit you. Actually, yes, it did. You know, that is not the kind of experience I want my players to be having in my games. So
Exactly.
overall, just more control for developers in terms of fine-tuning this makes a lot of sense.
And the good news is that I've not yet said is you can also add custom signals as well. So you get these predefined ones by Roblox, great, those might be really, really helpful. But say you did have one of the very skill-based games, and in your game you had an XP system or a level system, you could expose that as well and say that this is a signal I want to use for matchmaking.
Yeah, that is something I do remember. I had a conversation about this with some of my friends on Volleyball Legends, like pretty big competitive volleyball game. And for a while, they were really struggling with writing their own custom match. Like they wanted to add a ranked mode, which some games had done in the past. And doing it by hand is this really technically complicated task of like hooking up messaging service, and you communicate from all servers to each other. It was just this absolute nightmare of a headache. And then I believe, don't completely quote me on that, but my understanding is that they were actually in this beta, which is why they were able to add skill-based matchmaking into their game. And it was one of those, like I kind of earlier mentioned, like I absolutely love when they just roll out changes and then it's a little bit of work for me as the developer and then everything gets better. That was a massive change, from my understanding for them, where, you know, in the past, you would just have one player who was really, really good and then in a server of, you know, complete noobs. And it was just not really fun for anybody in that game because all the noobs were getting absolutely punned, to bring back some old terminology. They were absolutely, you know, they were just unable to compete. And then the better player really didn't enjoy, after a while, kind of dunking on the same few couple of players. So, you know, once again, very small change, or I guess depending on how you view it, different scale of change that massively improved all of their metrics across the board: retention, engagement, monetization, just all of these wonderful things. They were hitting bullseye. To come back to this diagram, they're a lot more.
Exactly. Well, I did want to bring it back to that analogy as well of the bullseye, because one of the really, really cool integrations between this and the last topic is that not only can you configure all of the robot signals, not only can you add your custom signal as well, but you can run experiments on this too. So you could, if you're not quite sure whether age is a big factor or whether language is a big factor, you could try that out with the experiments feature. It integrates seamlessly with that. And again, measure on retention, measure on conversion, measure on all the different metrics that you have available to you, and then settle on what are the right signals for your matchmaking. So all round, I think this is an absolute winner.
Oh, yeah.
I did also have another use case other than what they were pointing out, and it links back to what you guys were talking about last week with the safety analytics dashboard. Now, you can't yet use that as a metric in experiments. I'm curious to know if they'll add that at some point. But it would be interesting to see if you could, for example, say bullying was the biggest segment, or romance and sexual reports was like the biggest segment of your abuse reports. What if you grouped by age, for example, and put all of your eggs in that basket and said, I want to make sure that young people are with young people, teens are with teens, older people are with older people? Would you see a difference in your safety analytics? And it'd be really cool to measure against that. So that's something else you could do here. You know, if your game has a lot of player-to-player interaction and you see a lot of bullying on your safety reports, maybe just tweaking that around, whether it's language, whether it's age, and just see if that changes the charts at all. I think that'd be interesting. That's all we've got for you this week. Come back next episode for the latest Roblox news and features.
We've talked a lot about algorithms on this episode, so make sure to piece the YouTube on by liking, sharing us, and letting me know what you thought in the comments down below, along with your answer to the current trivia question.
Beyond the Blox is produced by Seb Jensen for Last Level Studios. Watch on YouTube and Spotify, listen wherever you get your podcasts, and catch highlights on TikTok, Reels, and Shorts. Visit lastlevel.co.uk/podcast for more. See you next time.